Welcome back to the channel. My name is Michael. Fist bump. Bop. Come on, get in there and get that fist bump. Now listen, when you ask, you shall receive. Let me share the screen with you and share with you. So on a previous video, the one that has 2.2K video views as of 5 days ago, we had a very respectful veteran who commented on this channel. Oh Lord, where was it? Mason Luke. Okay. Yeah, Mason 273. And he said, I served in the Marine Corps. First of all, welcome to the channel, brother. Second of all, thank you for your service. I was a 13B, a gun bunny. I was a artillery specialist in the Army. And I served from 2002 to 2008. So February 19th, or no, was it 28th? I don't know. It was in February of 2002 to 2008. um, and you requested, he says, here's what he says. He says, let me know what you think of the podcast when you watch. I would love to hear your opinion on his ideas. So when you ask respectfully in the comments for me to think about something or to reconsider something or to watch something and then react to it, you ask, you shall receive. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to go ahead and stop the share for a second. I just noticed that Vivek rhymes with cake. I'm going to try to pronounce that correctly. I had some grammar correctors in my last video, the one that is getting a lot of views right now, asking for me to pronounce his name correctly. So his name is Vivek. It rhymes with cake. Thank you for your take. I'm going to go cook a steak. His name is Vivek. Anywho, let's go ahead and react to this. I just clicked on the video. I skipped through a bunch of it and I wanted to react in real time as much genuinely as I could. It's only about 6 minutes long and he was responding to Vietnam veterans. So with no further ado, let's go ahead and jump in on this and we're going to share sound. All right, here we
Hardly a
go.
week goes by that I don't record a discussion with a Vietnam combat veteran, including one just yesterday. And, you know,
You
more
mean
than
my events?
no.
Oh,
I'm interviewing.
yourself.
I interviewed Vietnam vets all the
Oh,
time.
it's funny because when you say that, I have that same experience on this campaign trail. Yeah,
Oh well, that's
I
good.
thought you
So
that's what you're referring to. Yeah,
no. Well, that's great then. So I
yeah.
wanted to just ask you, as I think about the vets, including the one I spoke with yesterday, who, well over 50 years later, still carries the burden of that conflict with him.
Yeah,
Everything that we associate with Vietnam and the aftermath.
sure.
What do you have to say specifically to Vietnam vets?
What we have to say to Vietnam vets is, I'll tell you, it was just last week that I heard the story of one here in Iowa who recently passed. I think his name was Bud Day. I don't know if you know his story.
I'm going to pause that for a second. So Vivek has never actually served in the military before. So whenever you have a politician who is getting questioned by somebody who is either an advocate for a military, a caregiver, or a military veteran themselves, they have to try to step in your shoes somehow. And so if there's a gap in his personal and professional experience, if he never served in the military, then he has to immerse himself with veterans to find out what those issues are. So that's why you see him in these town hall type meetings, and he's been approached by veterans before. So he's trying to catch up, essentially, is what he's trying to do. He's trying to catch up with what he hasn't personally experienced himself. And then what he's going to do is he's going to use that, his interviews and then his research on the issues as a platform to then try to advocate for those issues according to what he believes about those issues. So let's listen to that a little bit further.
I don't know.
He was captured, subjected to torture, sticking things in his eye, trying to get information which he refused to provide. And every time they would torture him, he would sing the national anthem in their face. He passed a couple of years ago, And his story was one that actually was Congressman Steve King, who I spent the day with. He came to us with our events and he told his story, which stuck with me. And I've met countless Vietnam era veterans. You can usually spot them if they're wearing the hat.
Right.
And my message is a couple fold. One is, we are grateful to you for loving this country in a way that very few people in my generation today actually do.
Okay. So thankful to you for loving this country. This is only a 6-minute clip. So we need to at least recognize the fact that this is only a very short segment of his opinion on the matter. So I want to, give him that grace and that mercy in this, because I'm not about to tear him apart for something where it's only a 6-minute clip. All right. To rewind the clock, it was actually 1961 when Eisenhower made that speech. I was incorrect on one of my prior videos when he made that speech about the military industrial complex. We all know that the Vietnam War was an unjust war and it was escalated. We know that Nixon was involved. We know that the Department of Defense, and we know that there was a lot of neocons that were profiting off of this war. And we sent hundreds of thousands of our young men and some women to their deaths. And the ones that did make it back, we know that they didn't make it back all back in one piece. There was actually a book that I keep talking about, which is called What It's Like to Go to War by Karl Marlantz. He was a Vietnam veteran. We know that there's a ton of movies out there that cover the Vietnam War and how disgusting it was, how terrible it was. I mean, there's a ton of videos out. There's a ton of movies. I mean, Full Metal Jacket is probably the number one that I can think of as far as the terror and the fear of what it was like to have to go through basic training and then be sent overseas. So it's not a matter of just loving the country. It's a sacrifice. And many people didn't have a choice because there was something called conscription. If you're a male and you are 18 years or older, you have to register for selective service in order for you to not be prosecuted in this country. You have to. So it's not a matter of choice whenever you get conscripted. Of course, there was people that were called draft dodgers. But in many instances, it wasn't necessarily that they loved their country so much, right? It was that they had to. They had to. They were disenfranchised already with the war, but yet their number was called, their draft number was pulled up, and they had to go over and serve. So I just want to offer that as a little bit of a critique. It's not, again, I'm not tearing him down for this. This is only a 6-minute clip, 5-minute clip. But let's continue.
And the second thing I would say is that one of the reasons why is that we have now sent many of those sons and daughters to go repeat some of the same mistakes that our policymakers made in Iraq.
That's right.
And with a prolonged stay in Afghanistan, and now soon to be those same mistakes repeated. We will not repeat the same mistakes of the past, and we will honor your legacy by reviving actual national pride in this country. 25% recruitment deficit in the US military for young people. Why do we have it? Because they're not stupid. They see how we treat veterans on the back end.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if we're not a nation that stands actually for our veterans being the most honored and revered and well-treated amongst us, then we're not a country that actually believes in those ideals that are worth fighting for in the first place.
Yeah, that's a good point. Kudos to him for recognizing that. So first of all, just to react to that, I think that's probably his strongest statement out of this entire clip. That little 30-second clip that I allowed to play, that's solid. That's a solid perspective because he's right. Policymakers, but I'm going to go a step further and I'm just going to say war profiteers. And I think we just need to call it for what it is. I know that on other videos that I've seen of him, he's called people out for being neocons. He on stage with other Republican candidates. I think her name was it Hillary Clark? I think he's taken an absolute stance against these unjust wars. And I think that is a promise that I would love to see him fulfill if he did get the nomination. I know on my video that has gotten a lot of views is Vivek a good presidential candidate? A lot of people are kind of disenfranchised with this country, Democrats as well as Republicans. I myself am more of an independent. Um, I voted Republican pretty much my entire life. And then, after the craziness of the election and the march on the Capitol, I was like, you know what? I don't know what the heck's going on anymore. I just need to recenter myself and figure out what values actually fit for me. So for me in particular, I like to be a little bit more in the dead center so that I can be more objective. Now, I have a history of voting conservative Republican in my entire life, but that doesn't necessarily mean that if there was a good Democratic candidate that actually came up, I mean, let's just say Vivek was a Democrat. If he was the best candidate, I would vote for him, even if I'm an independent or somebody who has voted conservatively for my entire life. To me, it's not about the party, it's about the person. So now to respond directly to his points, what I'm going to point you to, and I'm going to show these with you on my channel, because I think this is where you're going to see the difference on the value added component of what I want you guys to see and what you to understand. I've actually done a fairly in-depth presentation on the issues that are facing us as a country when it comes to the military industrial complex. And you can simply just go to those videos. The first one is titled How to Save the US, the Military Industrial Complex Part 1, which is episode 16. And then also the second one, which is how are we going to take care of our people who have already served, them and the orphan and the widow. And that is How to Save the US Part 2, episode 17, which I just posted 2 days ago. So to summarize them, to preview them and to summarize them, I'm going to focus on part 2. I think Vivek could really use somebody like me as maybe like a hired consultant to actually talk through these issues, because I'm a veteran. I've been through it. I've been through the system. My bachelor's degree is in health service management. So I understand the hospital and I understand the insurance model. I understand the government. I understand the VA probably better than most when it comes to how it's structured, why it's structured the way it is, and the problems and the gaps in the systems. So he is not able to articulate those as well. If you think about a presidential candidate, they only can retain so much information about what the actual nature of the issue is. But then they have to hire people. If they get elected, they have to hire people who will then inform them and educate them. And then he can delegate his desire, his vision for the country. Because what you have to try to get out of this is his vision. What is Vivek trying to give as a vision? He wants us to go back to a sense of national pride. Well, what is national pride? I highly suggest you go back and listen to the YouTube videos that I've already recommended, which I just showed you, because in those videos, I tell you what national pride was, what we were based off as a country, and it wasn't military. But what I want to see have happen, and again, God has already put this on my heart. Here, I already know that eventually I'm going to have to actually do this. I'm going to have to actually start the treatment program, but I've already written a business plan for it. And I've just been waiting for the right time to step out when God pushes me to do that in God's timing, to start a treatment program, specifically for veterans, like Vietnam veterans. Because here's what the issues are, Vivek. Here's what you need to listen to, Vivek. And any Vivek supporters, here's what you need to know. Most Vietnam veterans that are coming back, they weren't supported very well when they came back. They didn't transition well, and they were disenfranchised. They were called baby killers and spit at, and they were treated very poorly, which is terrible, because in many ways it was a no-win situation. They were conscripted, drafted, forced to go overseas, witness a bunch of horrors, participate in unjust wars. Then when they came back, They were spit on by college students and other people called baby killers, and they were disenfranchised as a countryman. That's a major trauma, a series of traumas. That's a complex trauma. When you have multiple traumas over the course of a lifetime, that's complex trauma. It's not just regular PTSD, it's complex PTSD. So in order to treat that, that's a mental health issue. And if you're saying, Vivek, that there's 40 suicides a day for veterans in the military, then what's the problem? The problem is that we're not getting enough behavioral health, and it's not being addressed properly. Why? Because in their infinite wisdom in the 70s, they decided to stop psychedelic assisted therapy research in their infinite wisdom, and they classified psychedelics as a type 1 federally restricted drug, saying that it had addictive properties and that it was basically from the devil. Okay. However, what that did is it completely alienated all of the research that was suggesting that it was helping people who had PTSD, several issues of PTSD. And only now, in the last year or two, has the federal government allowed the VA to start doing trials with something called MDMA assisted therapy and psychedelic assisted therapies. They're right at the cusp of that. They're right at the beginning of that. And so because they're only right at the beginning of this research trial phase, we are in such a lag gap with these Vietnam era veterans who have already considered suicide, and many of them have already taken their lives. I worked specifically as a counselor, as a family counselor, with the mother of, well, she was the wife. She was a widowed woman, and her husband had killed himself. He was a Vietnam veteran, and the children suffered. Her daughters and her daughter's children, you could see, suffered. And so what we know is that whenever there's a war, it takes 3 generations in order for us to heal that wound. You can't just restore national pride by saying, hey, we love you, veterans. That's not how it works. They have multiple issues, and I've presented that in my second video, the How to Save the US Part 2, and I addressed that specifically. So I'd encourage you to go there. And ultimately, what I'm suggesting is that we implement a family-based behavioral health wraparound service for veterans that are at risk. And veterans that are at risk are people who have comorbid disorders. What's a comorbid disorder? That's when they have either a combination of physical and or mental and spiritual afflictions. So for me, somebody like me who had major neck issues, I got hit by a drunk driver, I got all these issues going on physically. And then I also had the PTSD, depression, and all that stuff. So we have to identify that these veterans that are at risk, they are falling through the cracks. So you need somebody like me who's fallen between the cracks, who can speak accurately about these issues, to be in your corner. And if Vivek himself reached out and saw this video and heard what I'm saying, I would absolutely volunteer to be a part of his cabinet if he won, even if I disagree with some of his instances as a candidate. I could care less about that. I care a lot more about helping the veteran and helping the families of veterans. That's all I care about. I could care less about who becomes president, truly. I care a lot more about the people. I only care about the people, and especially the children. So it's not just the Vietnam veteran themselves. It's not just about restoring national pride. It's also about supporting the family of these veterans who are coming back. I like the fact that he says there needs to be a decompression time. I talked about that in my How to Save the US Part 2 video. I highly suggest you go there. I'll include that in the link, and maybe in one of those things where you see it in the little card above, and How to Save the US Part 2. So let's go back and finish what he was talking about here.
So I've offered comprehensive veterans policy on this front. I mean, it's unconscionable that it's supposedly the number is 22 veterans per day committing suicide. I've looked into this, it's closer to 40 veterans per day committing suicide in the United States of America. That's not
Okay, so you want to know something that's ironic? I have a doctorate level education in psychology. I went to a place called Regent University in Virginia Beach, Virginia. I have years of experience working with people who are in crisis, including my own personal experience with crisis. I reached out to the Veterans Crisis Line when I was in a state of crisis. And you know what? It actually made the issues worse because every time I called crisis, I was talking to a new person and they didn't understand my issues. So it made me even more frustrated with the veterans, the VA system, and the crisis line because there was no consistency and comprehensiveness about the veterans crisis line. You talk to one person, they might be kind and caring and listening, but they really are only trying to direct you to the VA is essentially what they're trying to do. And so I volunteered. I signed up on USA Jobs. I went to usajobs.gov, signed up and applied to become a mental health crisis counselor for the VA. Waited almost 6 months. Almost 8 months to hear a reply. 8 months. Okay. If you're saying that if the VA has that much of a need for veterans that are in crisis, and it's taking almost a year to respond to an application from a veteran who has the education and the personal experience to be a veterans crisis counselor, and then I got a rejection from my application, that's a joke. To me, that's a joke. That the VA is so deluded that they don't even care about hiring veterans who have the right credentials and the right experience to help the very people who are going through the same thing that I went through: suicidal depression, PTSD. So it's a much broader issue. It's a much more complex issue than he could really truly try to articulate in 5 minutes. But we might as well see, what else he has to say about this, because I think he's on the right track, but we'll continue with it.
It's not America. Easy things we could do. Veterans coming back from combat roles, give them 3-week or 6-week decompression buffers in a third-party location. Give them privacy restrictions that stop them from being tagged with red flag laws if they report their PTSD. Allow them true medical choice through the VA. You shouldn't have to drive 100 miles or 120 miles to the nearest VA. You should be able to get community-based medical care near you. The earlier question was about my experience as a businessman. Here's one way I would use that. In a business, like a big publicly traded company, it's the shareholders who determine the pay of the CEO or the CFO. Well, I think we need to have a VA system where the top brass is held accountable in the same way. We need to treat the veterans as the shareholders of the VA. Right? This is how it means to honor our veterans in this country. And I think when we honor our veterans, that's how we honor their legacy. And so, one of those guys began to say, I said, "Thank you for your service, sir." And he had a different question. He says, "No, you don't have to say that." I said, No, I have to say that. In some ways, it wasn't even for him. It's for the next generation to know that we actually do honor those who have served this country.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that as long as we're continuing to tell their stories and their love of this nation, to pass that on to the next generation, then their service to this country will far exceed what they just achieved on the ground in Vietnam. But the echoes that we're able to pass down to the next generation of a national pride that we are badly missing. And it is my job as a leader from that next generation. At 38, I'm the youngest person ever to run for U.S. president as a Republican. Somebody who's guided by my gratitude to this country. I view it as my responsibility to pass that pride and that legacy on to your son and my sons and their generation. That's what I would say.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sir.
Okay. Well, I think he needs help. And I think he needs help with having the right people surrounding him, giving him the right advice, the right types of cabinet members in order for him to succeed, not only as a candidate, but as a potential president. Because hypothetically, if he did get elected, he needs to have the right policymakers alongside of him that would actually execute that vision. So I pray for that. And I've commented this on that previous video of is Vivek a good presidential candidate, that I do think that he is a promising candidate. I think there's some differences that I would be willing to work through with him and try to help advocate for a more balanced approach. But in the end, he's a young leader, and young leaders need to have the right type of people around him to support him. Right. My biggest concern is that he's taking a lone wolf path, and that he has made enemies in his own party. He has excluded himself by virtue of just the way that he debates. He's not making a lot of friends. He's not, and that's okay. I'm okay with that. But just as we know what happened with Caesar in the Roman times, when you make enemies on both sides of your party, you have to watch your back a lot more. And so he's taking on a daring approach to his candidacy. And I think, honestly, if he wants to succeed, I think he would need to become an understudy underneath somebody like Trump for like a 4-year term. And in that way, I think it would give him an insider's view on how to run the country, how to make the right friends. Because we can all listen, Trump is a meme. We all know that Trump is a blowhard, but when it comes to his policies, he's fairly moderate conservative. He didn't really rock the boat that much when it comes to his actual policies that he implemented. So I do think that he would be a great asset to somebody like Trump if Trump was to win the candidacy and to win the election. I think that a Trump Ramaswamy would be probably the most formidable pair that has ever run for president and vice president. Honestly, I do not see anybody ever being able to out debate Vivek and Trump in any kind of debate. I don't. Like, I've watched enough Vivek videos and enough Trump videos to be able to just say very confidently that I think that they could out talk anybody at any point over any issue when it comes to this country. Obviously the motives are important. We want to make sure that their motives are pure. And he says that he's a businessman. I've already talked about this in my prior video. I do think, like I said, I think Vivek had some questionable business dealings that I wasn't necessarily comfortable with. And I admitted that in my comment section on that video, where I said that maybe my issue with Vivek stems from what happened with COVID-19 and Big Pharma taking over and it becoming the pharmaceutical industrial complex, and Fauci and the way that the Biden administration mismanaged all these shutdowns. And it just felt to me like Big Pharma had bought out our country for 3 years and forced us into 2 years of isolation using these ridiculous policies, closing down all these small businesses. And I'm worried. And I still have concerns over the fact that he has investments with pharmacy and Chinese pharmacy investments, shares, and all that. So I just have to admit that, right? That up front, that may be one of my barriers and boundaries to wanting to promote him and advocate for him as a candidate probably stems from some of those issues, more than likely. But I also am willing to set those aside if he becomes president or runs for president and gets the nomination. Like if he actually won the Iowa caucuses and got the nomination, I would support him as the candidate, just based off of what I understand. But you also need to understand that what I'm saying is I still think he needs some time in the oven. Like, I still think he needs some time to work through some of those issues, but I still think he's a bright spot. in an otherwise tasteless Republican primary with all the other candidates that were on stage with him. Was it Christie and Clark and another individual? I can't remember who else was there. He was the bright spot out of all four of those candidates on the podium. He definitely destroyed everybody else. But the point is, this is when we're talking about veterans issues and we're talking about nationalism and all that kind of stuff. I highly suggest you go back and watch those other videos that I already made about these issues, because I think it'll give you a more well-rounded perspective on how we could approach these topics as a nation, not just Vietnam veterans, but all veterans from all wars, past, present, and future, on how we can reconstitute and reconstruct our military that is more compatible with the identity of a maritime civilization. So props to Vivek for standing out and learning more about veterans issues. I think he needs to do a little bit more of his homework, but he's on the right path. And I commend you guys for people who are in the comment section that are being respectful. If you come into the comment section and you're respectful, or you're joking around and having a good time, and you just really want to include and increase dialogue about these issues going on in the country because you truly care about your country and you want to see the best for it, you're welcome in the comment section. You can hit the subscribe button and join us as this movement going forward, because this is about truth. This is about setting our country free from these spiritual forces that want to destroy us from within. We are a prodigal nation, and the devil wants nothing more than to tear down our country. And so if we have candidates like Vivek that are willing to stand up for truth, then I would support those efforts. And going forward, as I said before, if he did get the nomination, I would support him and I would vote for him as the president. But if he doesn't, and it becomes a Trump nomination, then I would support him as the vice president. And I would want to see him work as an understudy underneath somebody like a Trump, so that he can learn from a strong charismatic character who has already been president before, so that when it comes to veterans issues, that we can actually have true comprehensive veterans care, past, present, and future. And I appreciate it. I appreciate the support. I appreciate you guys making those comments on the video. It makes me a better YouTuber. If I'm wrong on something, if you fact check me and I'm actually wrong, call me out on it. If there's something that you don't agree with, fine. We can agree to disagree. We don't need to take pot shots at each other and assume things about each other, because most of you guys I've never met ever in my life. And most of you I probably will never ever meet personally, face to face in my life. So just out of due respect, all I ask is that you be respectful to me, be respectful to the other people in the comment section. I know that we're talking about religion, politics, and personal choice. Those are three major no-nos when it comes to topics of conversation in this world. But somebody has to do it. Somebody has to be willing to take a stand for something. If you don't take a stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And just because I may not 100% agree with everything about Vivek does not make me the bad guy. I'm trying to express to you my best perspective from my own personal professional experience, and then also including a Judeo-Christian perspective on that, and trying to be honest through all of it. So you can do your part, hit that like button, right? It propagates a positive message going forward. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to focus on positivity, how we can actually impact change in our country and do it the right way by electing the right people. I'm going to be here this entire election cycle. This channel will be here all the way throughout. We'll probably be doing live streams during the caucuses, and then during the election process, we'll obviously be doing live streams, and we will be supporting the people in this country who are fearful of losing an election to a potential candidate that would use the presidency for their own personal gain. And so we want to come against that. And you can join me by hitting the subscribe button. I'll see you guys in the next video.